I just shopped at a big supermarket, and when I put the stuff in my car, I realized I forgot to pay for the Kit Kat bar in my hand. Thinking about it being a big chain store, I didn't bother to go back to pay. If this happens at a mom and pop shop, likely I'll go back to pay because I would feel so bad and it's unethical. When we are facing moral choices, besides what kind of person we are, what environment we are in, the ethical issue itself also impact our choices. Today, we'll talk about the character of the ethical issue, the moral intensity. What is moral intensity? Moral intensity captures the extent of issue-related moral imperative in a situation. How much do you feel about the consequences of a moral choice? When moral intensity is high, it increases your moral sensitivity and judgment, and you're less likely to engage in unethical behavior. Professor Thomas Jones from the University of Washington proposed an issue-contingent model which can best explain the concept. Moral intensity is multidimensional, and the characteristics of the specific issue that are involved in your ethical decisions include magnitude of the consequences, social consensus, probability of effect, temporal immediacy, proximity, and concentration of effect. To be noted here, these characters of moral intensity are different than the character of the decision-making agent, us, like the traits, our locus of control, for instance. It's also different with the moral development, like Kohlberg's model, and it's different from compared with environmental factors like the organizational culture or corporate policies. Now let's discuss them one by one. Magnitude of consequences. Magnitude of consequences of a moral issue refers to the sum of harms imposed on the victim or the benefits imposed on the beneficiaries of the decision. An act that caused 1,000 people to suffer a particular injury is of greater magnitude than the act that caused 10 people to suffer the injury. Or an act that caused the death of a human being is of greater magnitude than an act that caused a minor injury. Social consensus. Social consensus refers to the degree of social agreement that an act is evil or good. When there's a high degree of social consensus, there's little ambiguity about what should be done. Social consensus is frequently codified into laws, which make it quite clear what is and is not acceptable. For instance, the evil involved in discriminating against minority job candidates has greater social consensus than the evil involved in refusing to act affirmatively on behalf of minority job candidates. Or the evil involved in bribing a customs official in Texas has greater social consensus than the evil involved in bribing a customs officials in Mexico because there's more ambiguity. Researchers confirmed the effect of social consensus using empirical data. The study was conducted in 1997 and the event was developing virus on computer. At that time, there was no clear guidelines established, therefore social consensus varies. Different functions of the viruses such as erasing files, ignoring commands, and sending messages lead to different social consensus, in turn impact the ethical decision-making. Next, probability of effect. Probability of effect involves two probabilities. First, an action will actually take place. Second, the act will either cause harm or create a benefit. For instance, producing a vehicle that would be dangerous to occupants during routine driving maneuvers has greater probability of harm than producing a vehicle that endangers occupants only during rear-end collisions. And selling a gun to a known armed robber has greater probability of harm than selling a gun to a law-abiding citizen. Thus, the level of moral intensity increases in conjunction with the probability of an aversive event arising from a decision. Temporal immediacy. Temporal immediacy is the length of time between the present and the onset of the consequence of a moral decision. Shorter length implies greater immediacy. For instance, Releasing a drug that will cause 1% of people who take it to have acute nervous reactions soon after they take it has greater temporal immediacy than releasing a drug that will cause 1% of those who take it to develop nervous disorders after 20 years. And reducing the retirement benefits of current retirees has greater temporal immediacy than reducing retirement benefits of employees who are currently between 40 and 50 years old. When the effect is in the near future, it is considered to have a higher degree of moral intensity, and so is more likely to prevent unethical behavior. Proximity. Proximity is the feeling of nearness, either socially, psychologically, culturally, or physically, that the person has for the victims or the beneficiaries of the action in question. When there is a high degree of proximity, a person is more likely to carefully evaluate the available choices, so less likely to conduct unethical behavior. For instance, layoffs in a person's work unit have greater moral proximity than layoffs in a remote plant. Or for Americans to sell a dangerous weed killer in US markets has greater moral proximity than to sell it in Latin American countries. Concentration of effect. The concentration effect is an inversive function of the number of people affected by the act of a given magnitude. For instance, a change in a warranty policy denying coverage to 10 people with claims of $10,000 has a more concentrated effect than a change denying coverage to 10,000 people with a claim of $10. And cheating an individual or small group of individuals out of a given sum has a more concentrated effect than cheating an institutional entity such as a corporation or a government agency out of the same sum. Thus, the level of moral intensity is higher when an act has a significant effect on a single individual as opposed to a modest effect on many people. Can you think of a situation when you face moral choices and use these characters to evaluate moral intensity that impact your choice? Thanks for watching.